For a large portion of my life, my dad and I used to visit the coast quite often. We were avid stunt kite enthusiasts and went to the ocean any chance we got, be it a kite festival or just any old weekend. We either stayed at a hotel or motel, but a great deal of our trips were spent at a campsite. Due to high occupancy, we didn't stay at any of the places we had gone before and ended up driving around to find this one spot we passed on a previous trip that we thought looked cool. It was this small campground that even had its own cove, something you would have to go on one of the native reservations to see. We didn't know the name of the place, but after a great deal of driving and circling back once or twice, we eventually found it. It took a couple hours, but hey, it wasn't dark yet, so it could have been worse. At first, everything seemed fine. There were at least 7 different trailers parked in the lot, and they were hooked up to power. They were next to open spaces that looked perfect for the setup we had, which was just a mid-sized toy hauler and our truck. My dad pulled up to the main office and had me get out to go see if the door was locked because we didn't see any lights going on in there from where we were parked. I checked the door, and as suspected, it was locked. There wasn't any noise. I knocked on the door. The bell was either busted or just disconnected. It was an older wooden building in the same style as many of the other buildings around ocean shores. As I walked back to the truck, a bit disappointed, I looked over to the garage that's part of the main office building, and the door was just wide open. Still no lights, but a lot of old and new, really expensive tools and other material were just laying around, some of which were outside the garage. This is Washington in the spring. It had already been cloudy all day. It was drizzling when we pulled up. Why would they just leave a brand new generator and tools on the ground, in the elements for who knows how long? There's no cameras or security systems anywhere either, so they could have easily been stolen too. When I get to our vehicle, my dad tells me there's a truck running over at the other building in the middle of the park. I looked over and saw there's also a light on in that building. Thinking our luck has turned, we drove over, and my dad has me get out again. But this time he gets out too to stretch his legs. I get to the driver's side of the truck to find nobody in it. I knocked on the door before trying the handle to no response. And another locked door. At this point, I'm just annoyed because I knocked, called out to them, and got absolutely nothing. There were lights on inside through the windows. This building was more like a small tower compared to the other one. I get on top of this stack of wood up against the wall to look inside. What I saw was a lightly furnished and carpeted studio apartment. It was at this point I started to feel uncomfortable. There was no one inside. I started to look at some of the trailers parked around the campground and realized none of their lights were on either. It wasn't until I started walking around that I noticed that some of the trailers had been there a lot longer than we thought. Same with the vehicles next to them. One was practically collapsing in on itself and another had its door open. The inside wasn't much better than the other trailer. Some of them were older, some were newer. There were even a couple of tent trailers, but no people. No one at the beach in the cove, none in the bathroom building on the other side of the office, and nobody manning that goddamn truck, still running outside that empty cabin tower thing. There was absolutely no one on the premises, which doesn't make sense. People were sure as hell there at one point, but they couldn't have just up and left without their stuff, much less so their vehicles. The nearest town was 5 miles the opposite direction. My dad had finally caught on to how weird this all was and decided that we didn't need to continue being there anymore. We ended up going back to where we started and paid way more than what that motel room was worth for a few nights. But what would have happened to us if we stayed? After we figured out the tower was locked, my dad even suggested we just hook up to a spot and wait for someone to come back and charge us. What if I had stupidly agreed to that before looking through that window? But more importantly, what happened to all those people? And where the hell was the guy who owned that truck? I have always loved camping. There is something about being out in a tent, away from electronics and everyday life that gives me a sort of reminder that I'm not totally dependent on civilization and phones to survive. I know that not bringing my phone is where I made my biggest mistake, but hey, it's Michigan. We don't have scary predators here that cause me to worry, and I knew these particular woods very well. Never experienced anything bad before, so I figured it was as safe of a place to be. It was my younger brother Todd, my sister Amy, and her husband Don and me. All of us agreed on no phones, just tents, beer, and a relaxing time away from life. I thought it was going to be relaxing, but my life is never going to be the same. We all rode together in my sister's van and parked at the site we used to party at as teens. Even camped here a few times. The spider spot, really? Amy complained. When we first found this spot years before, there was an old stump that was littered with wolf spiders. We burned it to the ground after waking up to big, nasty spiders all over us after a night of drinking. So we named it the Spider Spot. Come on, that stump's gone. Besides, it's only a quarter-mile walk, and my feet have been killing me. Todd sighed. We all grabbed our stuff and started walking the 15-minute walk, looking forward to the fire and beer. The worst part of the walk was the damn broken branches that seemed to jump out just to stab your face and break off. After we finally got there, we did the usual setting up of tents and grabbed firewood, so the rest of the night would be filled with beer, laughter, and then bed after 25 creepy nighttime bathroom trips. It must have been around 1:30 in the morning when things started getting weird. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Don asked, hushing everyone. We sat quietly, and after a few seconds, we heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. "Just some other campers, man, probably doing the same thing we are," I answered with a laugh. Without warning, Todd shouted loudly to the people, "Got any more beer?" We all laughed and hushed him. We were having a blast and didn't think anything of it. Then we heard running. "What the hell, Todd? You pissed them off!" Amy started to panic a little. "Don't worry, Amy. They are probably drunk and just wanting to talk." Don comforted her, but you could see the worried look on his face as the footsteps got closer. My heart was beating out of my chest, thinking we were going to get into a drunken brawl. "Got any more beer?" It sounded like a weird recording of Todd, only different. "What the—" All of the hair on my arms stood on end. It really creeped me out. "Very funny assholes," Todd shouted, then more running footsteps, only this time away from our campsite. "Must be drunk teenagers messing with us." Amy breathed a sigh of relief. We all kind of nodded and agreed it was time for bed. That was kind of a buzzkill and creeped us out a little. "Hey, I'm sleeping in your tent, bud," Todd said kind of with a nervous glance around the darkness. "Pussy," I said with a laugh, but was secretly happy not to have to rough it out alone. Once we all were in our tents, it was very quiet. It was the only time I can remember being kind of scared. I must have dozed off because I woke up to Todd shaking me. "Jude, listen," he whispered quietly. At first there was nothing. Then I heard the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. It sounded like it was right outside my tent. "I'm sleeping in your tent tonight, bud." Again, it sounded like Todd, only not like him. I was terrified. Todd looked at me in horror, and I must have had the same look on my face because I was petrified. Then we heard the running again, and whatever it was, it ran off again. "Let's hurry and get the hell out of here," Don shouted to my surprise. They must have been listening. We all jumped out of our tents and ran back to the van as quickly as possible. I've never felt more relieved to be out of the woods. This was all last weekend and is completely true. The worst part is, Todd called me and said he's been hearing something outside his house at night. He wants me to come over tonight, but I'm honestly afraid too.